Hi. So welcome back to Study Chess with me. And this is the endgame session in which I have been studying Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual to try to acquire endgame knowledge. I hesitate to say skills because, well, time will tell about that. The lessons have been fantastic and really, really interesting. So have the exercises and illustrations been, but I need to point out, and if you followed the previous sessions, then you know this for a fact already, that of all of the exercises that he gave to solve, I solved only one. I got really close on a few, but close isn't cutting it. And I've never heard of a game won because you almost found the right move. So, yeah, I solved one. But it was really, really satisfying to know that I got one. And Dvoretsky is a very famous trainer of grandmasters, of world renowned abilities. So, yeah, I'm guessing that it has something to do with the standard that he expects from his usual students. In any case, this is now the chapter on mind squares. It's a new chapter, presumably still on pawns. The position that you see in front of you is the first one that appears in the text, and I'll read the text to you. So let's get to it. So, mind squares. Sometimes it is a single pair of squares that correspond. I refer to such squares as being mind. Do not be the first to step on a mind square, or you'll be blown up. That is, fall into zugzwang. You must either wait next to the mind square or move forward, accurately avoiding it. Here is a typical example of mind squares, and I took the liberty of already preparing the diagram for you. Here we have what I call untouchable pawns. And he puts these little quotes, which is why I make this little gesture. White's king shuffles between b3, c3, and d3, while the black king's goes from c7 to b7 to a7, neither of them able to attack the pawn. The squares c4 and b6 are mined. Okay, so just to illustrate this, in case it isn't completely obvious, what he means is that the instant black or white goes onto one of those squares highlighted in green, you lose. Because then the opponent will grab the other green square, the other mind square, the corresponding square, and you will have no recourse except to go back and lose your pawn and the game. So, for example, I'll move over here. Black moves. I move here. Black moves. I move here. Black moves. Now, suppose white decides, oh, you know what? I'm tired of this. I want to come over here. I have landed on the mind square. And of course, black immediately comes over here. And I have nothing to do except go back. I can't do anything. If I come here, the pawn here will go down, will fall. And any other square that I retreat to, I will lose the pawn again. So basically, moving to this mind square is an instant loss. And the same is true of black. So basically, neither of these two players can actually go to the mind square. And as a result, they can only sit there dancing around it. Okay, good. Okay, so here is the next example. It's described as illustrative example 120. I'm guessing 1 because it's the first chapter on pawn endgames. So let's take a look at this position. Okay, and this is directly from the ChessBase rendition of Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual. If you are interested in getting this particular version as opposed to the print book, for example, then you can go to the ChessBase shop and there's a link down in the description for this. So here, kings at e6 and c5 result in reciprocal zugzwang. White wins by forcing his opponent to go to the mind square first. Black to move would play king b5. However, white to play, he plays king f6. Now, obviously, he can't go to the mind square, as we already know. But we play king f6. Black plays king b5. And he points out, all the same, this is Dvoretsky after all, that king c7 is also hopeless. It's a passive defense because of king e7, king c8, king takes d6. The king captures the d6 pawn while simultaneously controlling the key square for the d5 pawn. king b5, king e7, king c5, king e6, gaining, of course, the opposition and therefore the pawn in the game. And here is the illustrative example 121. And now let's return to a position we reached while analyzing F. Sackmann's study from a previous example. The only winning try here is to get the king to the d6 square, which would be here. Okay. To keep the opponent from counterattacking successfully on the queen side, it is important to begin the march with the black king as far away as possible. Therefore, this consideration shows us the first pair of corresponding squares, a6 and b4. So a6 is here and b4 is here. So black to play, king b7, king b3, exclamation point, king a6, king b4, and here's the difference between king b4 and king a4. King b7. Now it's time to consider further action. Note the reciprocal zugzwang with the kings at d4 and b5. That means the d4 square is mined and must be circumvented. So he illustrates this. King c4, king a6, king d3, 2 exclamation points, and wow. Yeah, king d3 isn't exactly the move that I would just look around and say, king d3, of course. We'll get there. We'll get there. King a5, king e4, king b5, king d4, and black is in zugzwang. And that's why we had that whole little maneuver of king d3, e4, and so forth. Okay. King a4, king e5, king takes a3, king d6, and we win, of course. So let's just take a quick look so we can go back. So king d3, king a5, king e4, and here's how we do that. Now, we took advantage by making that little triangle there with the 3 squares, as you saw. So we came here, here, and then here. And since there's no reason why not to, let's take a look at the wrong move. Let's suppose we played king c3. So if we play king c3, black would play, well, we know we can't play king b5 because then king d4 wins. Just as in the normal line. So if we go here, then here, and we transpose to the line that wins for white. So instead, we're going to play king a5. That's perfectly reasonable. King c4. Not a lot of options here, honestly. Oops, and things have gone wrong. Well, it's an illustration of how things can go wrong just by a simple misstep, even if you're a pawn up. Fair enough. Let's go to the next one. So here we have the first game excerpt illustrating his lesson on mined squares. And it is a game between, or an excerpt of a game between Alexander Alekhine and Frederick Yates, played in Hamburg in 1910. Before going on, I will recommend the following. If the previous lessons and examples and exercises are anything to go by from his current manual, let's pay very close attention to the methods and to how it's done, because the last time his exercises were a mirror of the examples he had given us to understand and learn from. So if we understand and digest this example and the ones to follow, no doubt the exercises will be a little bit easier. So the first move is, and Feel free to put it on pause and try to guess what the moves are. I don't have that liberty because although you can't see it, I have the notation open in front of me. So king d3. And that's the correct move. And he does point out, all the same, that king e6 would be a mistake. Simply because of king d4, mine square. Thank you very much. Okay. So king d3, king d7. Yates understood that, but really you don't have to calculate more than a move ahead to realize this. e4, exclamation point. f4, king e2, king e6, king f2. Remember that very first example that we had at the beginning of this video with those two mine squares? Same principle. The fact that there's a pawn on c5 is irrelevant. So again, if we had actually come to king f3, then it would be the opposite. And Alekhine would be going home in shame. So king f2 exclamation point, and white wins. Black can't do anything. He's really pretty much forced to come and take this square. And after king f3, mine squares, thank you very much. This pawn is a goner, and so is the game. This is the final example on the lesson in mine squares, after which, according to the list of games, the next two positions will actually be exercises, which we will only actually do in the next session, since these usually tend to take quite a bit of time, especially on my part, since I have to study these. However, as you can see, it's not all about positions from studies from 100 years ago, or ancient problems, or Alekhine games, which are just fine, from 1910. Here we have 1996 between two players I have never heard of. We have Watu Kobisi, which according to the flag is South African, if I'm not mistaken, and Tu Huang Tai. And this was, I'm not really sure if that little icon is supposed to be China or Hong Kong. This is 1996, so it could be Hong Kong. In any case, this is the Olympiad held in Armenia, in Yerevan, in 1996. In any case, kudos to Dvoretsky for digging up this curiosity. And he comments here, the position is drawn. White sets a last trap which unexpectedly succeeds. Now, the position is drawn simply because, well, if you ignore these black pawns for an instant, and white were to win both of these pawns and those white pieces were to stay exactly as they are, it would be a draw. This is a standard position where you have an H pawn, which unfortunately is going to queen on the square of the wrong color because the bishop cannot control it. If the bishop were on c3 or b2 and it could control the pawning square, then it would be a win for white. But as it is not. So the fact that black has these two pawns, actually black would prefer to not have them at all, because it would just be that much easier. There's simply no way white can force a win here. But as it stands, he sets a last trap and black falls for it. It'd be really interesting to see how he does this, because remember, this is just to show that if you were white, don't give up. Your opponent might still screw up. There are ways to win this without your opponent simply keeling over unconscious from his table, from his chair at the table. Bishop d1 check. And he points out, all the same, that bishop f5, which would be an interesting attempt as well, must not be met with the horrendous mistake king h4, which would lose because of bishop g4 winning. And we will understand why this wins in an instant, because this is actually going to transpose to the trap that was actually played. So I won't show you the solution here just yet. bishop d1, king h4, the blunder. It looks so innocuous, doesn't it? Why is this such a mistake? So the correct move, just to point out, would be king g6, after which you can just play h5 and g4. And it doesn't matter if white plays, let's say, h4. You're not trying to push this pawn. You're not trying to protect it. Remember, these two black pawns are irrelevant. You can give them up. You don't even care about them. Instead, you're just going to march your king all the way to h8 and just sit there going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and let white try to figure something out. That's all. Okay. So he plays king h4, and now we're going to understand why this is a losing blunder, because it would seem like, well, what's the big deal? Here's the big deal. Bishop g4, and black has a little bit of a problem here. Black is drawn if he can bring his king to h8. If he has to bring his king down here, there's no draw. That pawn is going forward, and you're going to kiss your point or half point goodbye. So h5 only move, because if he comes to king g3, it's dead. King f5, we give up the bishop. And here's the reason why this is in a chapter on mind squares, because after h takes g4, h takes g4, mind squares, black is lost. Incredible. Black is forced to come down either of these squares, and it's game over. And we therefore understand why previously this move would have amounted to the same thing after this and this. Because suddenly if you play h5, I mean, we have the same problem. If you play h5, we just transpose to the game. Fantastic. Very creative win by Watu Kobizi. I don't know if I got his name right, but okay, so that wraps up the lesson on mind squares by Dvoretsky. And in the next video on the endgame, I will be looking at the two exercises that I saw that will test us on the knowledge of this particular chapter and these examples that he gave us. So thank you for joining me. Happy chess and good mates.